phases in the cycle of a bacterial population. And the first one is lag phase. So during the lag phase, it seems like nothing is happening. So you might be sitting there. Oftentimes, I've seen undergrads just kind of sit and say, okay, what's going on? Why don't I see anything happening in my culture? Well, that's because in lag phase, it's very difficult to detect any increase in the number of cells. And that, in part, is because the number of cells starts out relatively low, we presume, and it continues to stay fairly low. So we're still getting bacteria that are splitting, just as we talked about in one of the previous recordings. But there is a little bit of preparation needed for the bacteria to go through replication, to perform binary fission. Maybe they need to produce the FTSZ protein. Maybe they don't have that present in the cytoplasm at first, and so they need to make some, and then as they start to make some, it builds up, and they can both sister cells will end up, or both daughter cells will end up getting some of the FTSZ, so they don't need to start from 0 the next time they replicate. Maybe the cells at the starting point didn't have enough nutrients or resources, so they're bringing resources into the cell. They are manufacturing ATP, as we talked about in the metabolism chapter. So things are a little bit slow during this lag phase. So this whole thing is lag phase. Okay, next phase is log phase. During log phase, we have exponential growth. And in this phase of exponential growth, we have same thing. We have cells dividing. Each cell is going to divide into 2, and each resulting cell is going to divide into another 2 cells. So we have exponential growth that is going to be happening, but there's no hesitation, so to speak. There's no delay in between generation times, because we already have enough of the FTSZ protein. We already have enough ATP from the nutrients, because we took in lots of nutrients and made lots of ATP in between these generation times, so that now these daughter cells have that, and they're going to go into this phase ready to just keep dividing. And in log phase, this is what we see. We see a steep curve that increases quickly. Y-axis is a normal arithmetic scale instead of a log scale. Then we're going to see this sharp increase here like this. Now, if we then go to the next phase, in most situations, after our log phase, we're going to get a stationary phase. In stationary phase, this is where everything kind of crashes down. So there's no food left. There's no space left. There might be waste products, there will definitely be waste products, and they might be toxic. And cells are starting to die off. But equal number of cells are still dividing. So for every cell that dies, you get another cell which is going to go through binary fission. So you kind of replace every cell that's dying. And that's why the population size plateaus here. So you don't get an increase or a decrease at this point in stationary phase. Finally, death phase or decline phase is when we have a decrease in the overall population size. We have a decrease in the number of cells. And again, this is because of all the things that we just talked about here. There's no food, there's no space, there are waste products. And at this point, that has become so severe that there are more cells dying than cells dividing. Now, sometimes people get confused here because we've talked about a couple of different concepts, and we've talked about individual cells going through binary fission, but here we're not talking about graphing what's happening in an individual cell. This is what happens at the population level. You cannot draw a curve like this for a single cell because you're measuring the number of cells here on the y-axis, so it doesn't make sense to graph it for a single cell. Instead, you are graphing what's happening in the population over time. And similarly, people tend to get confused when they try and compare this to these graphs. So in these graphs, we are talking just about log phase. We are not talking about, we're talking about lag and log phase. So this portion here, we're not talking about stationary phase. We're not talking about death or decline phase, because we start out where, as we see here, it doesn't look like there's a large increase at all in the number of cells over a certain amount of time. And then the population skyrockets. So that is the log phase. This is lag, and then this part is log.